Disciple Up number 238. Future Church. Mega. Micro. This is Disciple Up, the disciple empowering podcast where psychology, science, the real world, sin, self, and culture meet head on, and Scripture rules. If you're a follower of Christ looking to grow or looking for some biblical answers, then get ready, because it's time to Disciple Up. Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. A podcast that might be better suited for the end of the year, around the first of the year, but I found this stuff now, and I'm going to talk about it now because it's my podcast, and that's what I'm going to do. And I know that this is a topic that probably won't interest a lot of people, but, you know, I've been in the ministry for over 40 years, so obviously it interests me. So if a lot of people don't listen, oh well, that's the way it goes. Because this kind of stuff does interest me, and I think as Christians, if you're a thoughtful Christian, and hopefully you are if you're listening to this podcast, and if you're not, boy, are you going to be sorry you tuned into this podcast or downloaded it or whatever. We need to be thinking about these kind of things. The younger you are, the more that statement is true than if you're an old geezer like me. Now, let me just say before we move on, my name is Louie. I'm the senior pastor of River Church in the Parker, Arizona area, which is the middle of nowhere out along the Colorado River. Been in ministry a long time, and this podcast is just one of the ways I like to talk about Scripture, talk about other things that interest Christians and that we need to be thinking about. And if you would like to get a hold of me, if you have any ideas on things that you'd like to hear, you have questions about the Bible or Scripture or what's happened to you in a church or something that you'd like discussed, you can do so very simply. Just email me, Louie, that's Louie, at discipleup.org. And if you don't want to email me, you can also go by our Facebook page. If you have Facebook, facebook.com/discipleup. Leave your comments there. Now, the homepage for me on the internet and for this podcast is discipleup.org. There's no place on discipleup.org where you can contact me, but there's links to my books and links to video teaching and links to newspaper articles and a column I do for an online site and links and links and links and all kinds of stuff. And every episode of this podcast is there. So that's enough to keep you busy for a while, trust me. And today, today's podcast was kind of kicked off by something I saw on Facebook, and I followed it up. It's from a website called Church Leaders. And the name of the article is Why the Mini Church is the Latest Trend in American Religion. While megachurches often make headlines, most congregations in the United States are relatively small. Now, there's nothing new about that, but he does talk about something here that I found kind of interesting. This is from November 17th, 2021 by Bob, and I don't know how to pronounce Bob's name. I've seen it a lot. Smietana, Smietana. Links, by the way, to the three articles I'll be referencing can be found in the show notes at discipleup.org. The Reverend Derek Miller has seen the future of the church in America, and it is small. On a Sunday morning in early November, Miller, guitar in hand, stepped up to the microphone at Cornerstone Church of Spring Green and began singing the familiar Charles Wesley hymn, "Oh, 4,000 Tongues." A handful of people scattered in the sanctuary sang along, including a church elder in the front row, next to a pair of young kids tapping on tambourines. By the time all the latecomers arrived, there were 12 people in the congregation. Things used to be different. 5 years ago, the church was at its height. As many as 100 people would show up for Sunday service. But the 2020 election, the racial reckoning after the death of George Floyd, and COVID-19 have taken their toll. On a good day, if everyone shows up, there might be 30 people. Services are often a one-man show. On this Sunday, Miller led the singing, preached the sermon, and even handled the video for the live stream of the service, moving the camera closer to the pulpit and greeting people online before preaching. He wrote the song the congregation sang before communion. Cornerstone is part of the fastest growing group of congregations in America, the mini church. Now, you've all heard of mega churches. Now we're introducing something new, and this is what got me interested in this, the mini church. According to the recently released Faith Communities Today study, half the congregations of the United States have 65 people or fewer. That's not really new. The number's a little different than it used to be, but still pretty close, while 2/3 of congregations have fewer than 100. Now, they have a chart here that you really should look at. This is when I wish I was doing this on YouTube. I keep threatening in my own mind, of course, to do that. I've done a couple, but I haven't really done it yet, but I'm still thinking about it. But it shows from the year 2000 to the year 2020, the median worship attendance among U.S. congregations, not average, median. 137 in 2000, 129 in 2005, 115 in 2008, 105 in 2010, 80 in 15, and 65 in 20. Not exactly the figures that you wanted to see. That's a marked change, back to the article from 2 decades earlier, when the 2000 Faith Communities Today survey found the median congregation had 137 people, and fewer than half the congregations had fewer than 100. Shrinking attendance figures, coupled with an increase in the number and percent of small congregations, obviously indicates that a good many congregations are not growing, the study authors found. Not exactly a groundbreaking or dazzlingly brilliant conclusion, but nevertheless it's accurate. Indeed, the median rate of change between 2015 and 2020 was negative 7%, meaning that half of all congregations declined in attendance at least 7%. And I'm going to do something on the fly here. 2015. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just looking at my figures for River Church's figures from 15 to 21. We have definitely declined by quite a bit, although, of course, this year's not done yet, so we'll see how that works. But, yeah. Yes, indeed. We are part of that trend. The report reflects the reality that religious Americans are being sorted into 2 kinds of churches. Oh, wait, I missed a paragraph. Duh. While most congregations are small, however, most worshipers attend a larger congregation. That's a really important point. Let me read that again. While most congregations are small, in other words, there's a whole lot more mini churches or small churches than there are mega churches by a factor of 10 to 1. I have no idea. Most worshipers attend a larger congregation. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a mega church, but something, let's say, that averages over 100. Another prominent report, the National Congregations Study, found that while the average congregation is small, about 70 people, the majority of churchgoers are worshiping in a congregation of about 400 people. Okay, so there's your break. You've got tons of small churches, 70 and under, but most people are in the larger churches. And 400 people compared to a mega church is nothing. I mean, you've got 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people in your church. 400 people, that's might be the size of your staff if you counted all your part-timers. So there's that. Okay, so he goes on. Among the worshipers at Cornerstone that Sunday was Lisa McDougall, a longtime friend of Miller and his wife Deborah. She said that she appreciates being part of a small congregation where relationships matter more than the spectacle of a Sunday morning. Quote, "It's like a house church in a really nice setting or a small group," she said. "I'm not interested in a large congregation." Now, if you go to a small church, you hear things like that a lot when you talk to people about churches, because there are definitely people out there, lots of them, who don't want the big church experience. And obviously, there are apparently many more who do. Ryan Burge, assistant professor of sociology at Eastern Illinois University, knows about the challenges of small churches firsthand. For about a decade and a half, he's been pastor of First Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, Illinois, small American Baptist congregation. Small church pastors can often be under tremendous pressure, said Burge. Gee, thank you. Glad somebody noticed that out there. They are often the only person keeping things running. It's difficult to take time off because there's no one else to preach or lead services. And if they leave, what will happen to the church? Still, even among smaller churches, there are differences. With 50 or 60 people, there is a buffer between you and the abyss, he said. When you get down to 10 to 15 people, there is no buffer. We have a church in this town that's surviving with less than 10 people. Technically surviving. In reality, it's dead as a dodo bird. And we had another church that got down to about 15 people, and they have merged with a mega church. I was going to say church plant, but that is incorrect. It is a campus of the mother church up in Lake Havasu City. So, back to the article. So, in other words, I've seen both of these things in this town, and we had another church die that I had quite a few friends in, actually. It died like 15 years ago. So you see things like that happen. At Real Hope Community Church in Oswego, Illinois, a Free Methodist congregation about 50 miles west of Chicago, the Reverend Jill Richardson saw her congregation of about, there we go. I'm sorry, totally lost my place. Of about 20 people, she said her congregation of about 20 people tries to focus on building closer relationships and reaching out to the community. The church recently bought its first building, a 3-bedroom house near downtown, which hopes to rehab into a meeting space for worship and community events. Richardson hopes to have a community garden as well. Okay. Let's see. The Millers, who met at Maranatha Campus Ministry while students at the University of Wisconsin pastored a church in Madison for years before starting Cornerstone. Okay, we'll skip that stuff. Okay. He volunteered to work at an EMT, which during COVID-19 meant providing testing and vaccinations. He was still able to minister to the community that way. He said, quote, "I really think more pastors, especially those in small communities, ought to do this." Okay, we'll skip. I'm trying to skip things that aren't really relevant. They get into all these details that don't really matter. The new building, which can seat about 200 people, features a large fellowship hall where the congregation hosted community meals pre-COVID and a modern sanctuary equipped with a pair of projectors on the ceiling. The back wall, which soars more than 30 feet high, is paneled in ash board, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Things begin to fray for the church during the Trump era. Now, I find this interesting that the online, and I don't know who owns this site. I would be interested in knowing because did they do blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I don't know if they're tied into Christianity Today. Christianity Today decided they really hate former President Trump, and they take shots at him whenever they can. So when I saw this, I thought, I wonder if these guys are tied in with them. It says the Millers were skeptical of Donald Trump as a candidate, and while they didn't preach against Trump if people asked, the Millers shared their doubts. That did not necessarily go over very well, Derek Miller said. Things got worse in 2020 after Deb Miller, who serves on the Spring Green Village Board, recorded a short home video detailing why she would not vote for Trump despite being a lifelong Republican. The video was picked up by a group called Republican Voters Against Trump and went viral. And it was shown in a montage of videos at the Democratic National Convention. She said she didn't really think anybody would ever see it. Isn't it amazing that this is 2000? We're almost to the end of 2021, and people still make videos and take pictures and say they didn't expect anyone to see it. Stop doing that. Wake up. How many times does this have to happen before you realize any time you take a video or a photo, you should expect it to be seen by everyone. And if you don't think it's proper for everyone to see it, delete it. And make sure it's actually really gone, not just in the trash bin where it can be resurrected quite easily. boy. Miller also had conflict in his role as pastor because of what he saw in the EMT, where he saw people dying. So he insisted on social distancing and wearing masks in church, and some people didn't like that and left. Understand that. We shut down for a month over my objections, and we lost 2 people. And since then, we've always been open to letting people choose. We've rearranged our seating to put some distance there, but if people want to wear masks, they can. If they don't, they don't have to. We have masks available if they want one. And we've not had anyone that I know of catch COVID at our church. So there's that. So anyway, Mr. Miller said, he believes in the importance of small congregations. He worries that in larger congregations, it's too easy to be a spectator or a consumer or feel cut off from involvement or decision-making in a church's ministries. I believe in small churches because I believe ministry belongs in the hands of regular people, he said. And this article first appeared on religionnews.com. So this got me to thinking about a lot of things. First of all, let me just say this. He's absolutely right. If you want ministry to be kind of more of a grassroots thing that's controlled by real people, that's done by real people, you're going to have to go to a small church, because in mega churches, ultimately, all the big decisions are made way up high because they have to be. And look, a mega church is no different in some ways from any other very large organization, whether it's a business or a nonprofit or an organization or whatever. The larger anything becomes, 2 things happen. One, at least 2. One, it becomes better at doing certain things. It can have more ministries. It can have more outreach with those ministries because it has more money to put into those ministries. The aforementioned mega church that's had this satellite, that's had this campus going down here. We were in the school for 2 years, is now going to take over First Baptist Church, and they have announced they're going to pour $500,000 into renovating the buildings. That's not something any local church can get anywhere near. Not even close. So if that's your thing, there you go. Go to the mega. On the other hand, if you'd like to actually have a say in what goes on, you're not going to find it there. You're not. You may have a say in some of the things that go on your local campus, but on the bigger decisions and all that, that's all made way upstairs by a small group of probably powerful people. A lot of them will be successful business people and other people like that. So, and it may be a staff-driven church. I'm not familiar. I don't know anything about that church's makeup, but a lot of megachurches are staff-driven as well. So then you have, of course, that group that's running everything, which is good in that they understand ministry, but it's bad because it's easy to get cut off from the community. My view of life and work and the church is very different from most of the people on the ministry council. That's our board. That's why it's good to have them there and me here, because it helps strike a balance. And I think that's important. So mega churches, and I've gained a lot from mega churches. I've learned a lot from mega churches. I've been in seminars, lots of them from mega churches. And they do a lot of really good things. They also do a lot of really bad things because I said one of 2 things happens. Yeah, the big stuff gets bigger, but the small stuff, it's very easy to fall through the cracks in a mega church. It happens in small churches too, of course, but it's a lot easier there. It's a lot. You have to pretty much join a small group or get into a ministry or both if you want to really, get to know people and see the same people every once in a while and all that stuff. So, yeah, they don't do everything well. Neither do small churches, and that's the point. The point is, if the future of the American church is mega mini, like 2,000 and up, that's a mega church, versus under 400, I would say under 200. I would say under 100. Let's say under 100. If you're talking about a mini church, let's talk about under 100 people or under 50 or 70 people. Then that's, I don't know that that's healthy. And I don't know that that's a world we want to see. But here's the thing. When you start making predictions, you're entering the arena where there are tons of predictions. I've got 2 other articles here which I found, and I could have easily reproduced 20 of these things where people have made predictions. And of course, at the end of the year, we're about a month out, you're going to get all kinds of predictions from people about what's going to happen next year, next decade, blah, blah, blah. And if you've ever tracked any of those, you know that the vast majority of them are wrong, R-O-N-G, wrong. So here's one by another writer I've seen quite a bit from, Carrie Nieuwhof, N-I-E-W-H-O-F, Nieuwhof, I guess. 10 predictions, 10 about the future church and shifting attendance patterns. Some of these will be incredibly obvious, probably, but let's take a look at them. So every generation experiences change. I'm going to skim through a lot of this. He says 48% of millennials born between 1984 and 2002 can be called post-Christian in their beliefs, thinking, and worldview. I'm surprised the number is that small, quite frankly. I think the change we're seeing around us might one day be viewed on the same level as what happened to the church after Constantine's conversion or after the invention of the printing press. So what will the future of the church really be like? How should you and I respond? Okay, before we get going, a few things. I realize making predictions can be a dangerous thing. It's not can, it is a dangerous thing. Maybe even a little ridiculous. Yep. But I want to offer a few thoughts because I'm passionate about the mission of the church. That's cool. So, born out of a love for the gathered church, offer a few thoughts. Consider it thinking in pencil, not ink. He says this, putting it on a website. See? Even younger people who are digital and do this stuff digitally, they still think analog, in some respects anyway. While no one's really sure of what's ahead, talking about it at least allows us to position our churches for the changing world. So here we go. Number 1, the potential to gain is still greater than the potential to lose. Okay. Every time there's a change in history, there's potential to gain and potential to lose. Actually, every time there's change, there is a real change in history, you do both. You're going to lose a little somewhere along the line. Hopefully you'll gain a whole lot more and it will be worth it. But that's the truth in my opinion. Number 2, churches that love their model more than their mission will die. That said, many individual congregations and some entire denominations won't make it. The difference will be between those who cling to the mission and those who cling to the model. The mission, let's see, he gives the example of the car and the horse and buggy. Let's see, look at the changes in publishing, music, and even photography industry over the last few years. See a trend? The mission is reading, it's music, it's photography. The models always shift, moving from things like 8-tracks to cassettes to CDs to MP3s and now streaming audio and video. Companies that show innovation around the mission like Apple and Samsung always beat companies that remain devoted to its method, Kodak. Okay? Number 3, the gathered church is here to stay. Totally agree with that. Read the comments on this blog or any other church leader blog, and you would think that some Christians believe the best thing to do is give up on Christian gatherings of any kind. That is naive. Not only naive, but after our experience with COVID, I think it's pretty well definitively proved that digital meetings aren't the same as real meetings. They're not as satisfying. They do not engage. And depending on what's going on, it's not a good substitute. It's not the same thing. Now, if that's all you have, then great, use it. Go for it, because it's better than nothing, but it's not the same thing. Consumer Christianity will die, and a more selfless discipleship will emerge. Okay, let me say, I'm pretty sure I'm quite a bit older than Carrie, and I've heard this for a long, long time, Carrie, and I mean, doesn't mean that it won't, but I haven't seen any sign of it yet. Consumer Christianity asks, what can I get from God? It asks, what's in it for me? This leads us to evaluate our church, our faith, our experience, and each other according to our preferences and whims. In many respects, even many critics of the church who have left have done so under the pull of consumer Christianity because nothing meets their needs. All this is antithetical to the gospel, which calls us to die to ourselves. As the church reformats, repents, a more authentic, a more selfless church will emerge. Okay. Look, I'm a baby boomer. So I came out of a very optimistic, idealistic would be a better term for it actually, time and generation. And you used to read stuff like this all the time, or hear people talk like this all the time, in the 60s and 70s, and into the 80s. So it's 2021, and where is this wonderful, selfless culture that we were going to make? The wonderful, selfless, no, we're here in this big, ugly, stupid mess that we're in. I think that's naive. I would like to see it happen. I wish it were true. I'm not holding my breath waiting. Number 5, Sundays will become more about what we give rather than what we get. The death of consumer Christianity, he thinks it's going to die, but what if it doesn't, will change our gatherings. Our gatherings will become less about us and more about Jesus and the world that he loves. Rather than a gathering of already convinced, the churches that remain will be decidedly outsider-focused, and word will be supplemented with deeds. In the future, church, being right will be less important than doing right. There's a kind of a problem there. Sure, that involves social justice and meeting physical needs, but it also involves treating people with kindness and compassion. Yeah, social justice. Okay, you wanna start a fight? Say those 2 words. I don't even know what that means. I think it means whatever people want it to mean, and I don't think it's a helpful phrase. The concept of wanting to see a just society, that's biblical and that's helpful. The term social justice has been hijacked and mutilated and beat to death by both sides, or all 4 sides, or however many sides there are nowadays, and I really don't like using it. Number 6, attendance will no longer drive engagement. Engagement will drive attendance. Okay, stop. Stop talking like this. This is leadership talk. This is leadership jargon. If you read leadership stuff, if you listen to it, it's like every other career, every other area of interest has its own particular jargon. And leadership talk, whether it's in the church or out of the church, has its own jargon. And it's annoying as snot to me. It drives me nuts. Because we bandy about these terms. It's going to drive this, and it's going to drive that, blah, blah, blah. What does this even mean? Attendance will no longer drive engagement. Engagement will. He's trying to say we're going to flip the model that most churches run on today. I understand that, but I am not holding my breath. Simplified, number 7, simplified ministries will complement people's lives, not compete with people's lives. Okay, here we go again. For years, the assumption has been that the more the church grew, the more activity it would offer. The challenge, of course, is that the church can easily end up burning people out. I've got a very small church, and my people don't have time to do anything, so I'm not so sure the problem's with the church. Nevertheless, it can be, and I know churches where it is, but I don't think most of them are there. So you can say that you're not going to compete. You're going to complement. Really? I thought we weren't self-focused people, because you talked about that a minute ago. So shouldn't I be willing to sacrifice to serve God? Apparently that part of consumer Christianity hasn't died yet. Number 8, online church will supplement the journey, but not become the journey. There's a big discussion right now around online church. I think in certain niches online, church might become the church for some who simply have no other access to church. But there is something about human relationship that requires presence. That's what I was talking about a minute ago with the whole COVID Zoom meeting thing. Because the church at its fullest will always gather. Online church will supplement the journey. Yeah, this I actually agree with. In fact, this is This is true now, and it's going to stay true. Now, I know there are some online churches, and with some people, you'll be able to do this. But with the vast majority of people, this is not going to cut it. Online church will become more of a front door than a back door. Again, with the leadership jargon, no question that today's online church has become a back door for Christians who are done with attending church. While online church is an amazing supplement for people who can't get to the service, it's still an off-ramp for Christians whose commitment to the faith is perhaps less than it might be. Within a few years, the dust will settle, and a new role for online church and online ministry will emerge. Online church has the potential to become a massive front door for the curious, the unconvinced, and for those who want to know what Christianity is all about. It has the potential. I'm not convinced we'll see the potential actually, appear, but I agree, potential is there. Number 10, gatherings will be smaller and larger at the same time. Here we go. More jargon. I've heard this before. While many might think the megachurch is dead, it's not. Yeah, trust me, it's not. While others think that megachurches are awful, there's nothing inherently bad about them. Size is somewhat irrelevant to a church's effectiveness. Notice that word he put in there? That's an interesting word. Do you see that word anywhere in the New Testament? Because if you do, let me know, because I really haven't. And yet that's a big thing amongst church leaders and all of that. And to an extent, I agree. We want our ministries and churches to be effective, but size is not irrelevant, first of all, to effectiveness. If you think that take any federal government, the Pentagon, whoever oversees, welfare on the federal level, all these big, huge, giant, they're not efficient and they're not effective. They're not nearly as effective as something smaller. Because one of the things that happens when you get to a certain size is it gets harder and harder to track all the little individual moving pieces. So I would argue with that a little bit, but okay. There are bad megachurches, yes there are, and bad small churches. Oh yes, there definitely are. And there are wonderfully effective megachurches and wonderfully effective small churches. We will likely see large churches get larger. Multi-site will continue to explode, unfortunately, as churches that are effective expand their mission. Someday I've got to do a podcast on the whole multi-site thing. I've really changed my opinion on it in the last 5 years or so. But let's not get into it now. Let's just say I know they say they're doing this to expand their mission. I'm just wondering if maybe it might have something to do with expanding their egos as well. Moving on. At the same time, churches will establish smaller, more intimate gatherings as millennials and others seek tighter connections and groups. Paradoxically, future large churches will likely become large not because they necessarily gather thousands in one space, but because they gather thousands through dozens of smaller gatherings under some form of shared leadership. If that's what the mega church becomes in the future, then it will be unrecognizable as a mega church. Because the whole point of megachurches today is how many peeps have you got coming on Sunday morning? That's the deal. Okay, then he offers at the end of this his Church Growth Masterclass. Moving on. Last one. This is from a blog called Rookie Preacher. Helping You Preach and Lead Better. It's by Brandon Kelly. He did this 3 years ago, according to the front here. And here's his top 10 predictions for the next 10 years, he said. So we're down to 7. 1, there'll be a wave of succession coming, and churches that ignore that will rapidly decline. Churches that were started in the 70s, 80s, and 90s and have thrived are still being led by their founding pastor. Now, 3 years on, we're starting to see this happen. And as the founding pastor ages, the need to take succession seriously is a growing dynamic. This isn't the only dynamic in play as those church plants that grew in the seeker-sensitive attractional movement, but this dynamic is at play in the majority of churches still being led by baby boomers. Thank you. So he's right. That's a big thing coming. That's sort of, that's pretty obvious. Preaching and teaching will become even more important. Churches that thrive over the next 10 years will see the internet as a vast mission field. Churches that happen, the sermon that happens at the big gatherings will be repurposed for consumption on video and social media platforms. I understand this is already happening and has been for a while, but it's going to be happening on another level. Instead of just finding random clips from a sermon, repackaging them and promoting them, churches will begin to think about keyword research and look for ways to serve people who are seeking Bible teaching. Number 3, youth ministry will be a crisis for some and thrive for others. I think a lot more are going to be in crisis than thriving, but let's hope I'm wrong about that. The youth ministries that see themselves as a ministry that exists to disciple youth will thrive, but it won't be easy. Emphasis on digital strategies and communication will need to increase. Leader training will need to increase. Youth ministries will need an army of caring adults who are willing to go play games, etc. Experimental opportunities will need to increase. Things they can't do online, like serving someone in need. That's not experimental. That's experiential opportunities will need to increase. The table will be the best gathering place. Okay, number 4, the church's programming will either simplify or it will be a catalyst for church plateauing. Busy churches, he says, will continue to be plateauing churches. Laser-focused churches will continue to be thriving churches. The interesting thing is that the people who push me most in the ministry to have more and more stuff going all the time, it's not me that's pushing that. It's the people in the church who want these things happening even if they don't want to go to them. So one of the things you don't see the leadership people talking very much about is this dynamic of people that equate busy church schedule with effectiveness or with outreach or with the church that really cares about its community. That's an issue. 5, church revitalization will become the new thing in ministry. Churches will need to be revitalized. He quotes Thom Rainer, who says, of the 300,000 churches in need of revitalization, 100,000 will revitalize organically or internally. Another 100,000 will be revitalized through replanting. It's a bold assertion, but something that could very well unfold in the next 5 to 10 years. And that last 100,000 churches are going to croak. Maybe. Probably. We'll see. Networks connecting pastors will grow exponentially. Okay. What do you know? This guy's part of the restoration movement. That's the same part of the church I'm from. Had no idea. Virtual reality experiences will be the front door for first-time visitors. Okay, we're going to skip all that. That's pretty out there still for most of us. More resources will go to children's ministries. Agree with that. More churches will design their campus to be gathering spots for their community. Well, yeah, if you have the land to do it. What if you don't? Because, land's not cheap, people. Number 10, ministry education will dramatically change. More and more churches will choose to start leadership institutes where they are training the next leaders for their church. Combine that with the growing number of ministry leaders offering online courses. Join the waiting list for Sticky Sermons Academy. Never even heard of it. And you'll see what he means there. So there you go. Now, the thing about all this is that anybody can predict the future. I didn't say anybody could get it right. I said anybody can predict the future, right? Anybody can make predictions about anything. You could predict what the stock market's going to be like tomorrow. You can predict, who's going to win the next election. You can, people do that all the time. And you're more likely to be wrong than right because you don't have any idea what's going to happen in the future, and neither do I, and neither does anybody else. Only God knows what's in the future. To God, the future is certain because he sees it all. To us, the future is kind of always in motion. in an odd sense, it changes because our understanding of what's going on around us changes, or what's going on around us begins to change, and something new comes in that we had never considered before. And so that makes us then rethink what the future will be like. Well, God doesn't have that problem because he knows everything that's coming, but we don't. So I think that exercises like this can be helpful in terms of to kind of shake you out of your box and make you think a little differently. But I don't know that in the end it's really going to make a difference. But I do know this, that Christianity in America is in a lot of trouble. And Christianity in America has to become more willing to, accept the fact that not everybody is going to fall into the same boat. Not everybody wants to go to a seeker-sensitive church. Not everybody wants to do this. Not everybody wants to do that. You can't please everybody either. That's for darn sure. So the idea that it's either going to be mega or mini, I think is probably false. I think you're always going to have other types of churches across the spectrum in terms of numbers and sizes, but I do think you're going to see a reduction in that, a vast reduction in that, to where that more and more mega churches are just going to suck up a lot of these failing small churches, and a lot of churches in the middle that don't have the money or whatever are either going to decline. So you're having a growing number of smaller churches, even though they're dying off. New ones are coming in all the time from churches that once were larger, whose people have left to go to the megas. And now that the megas are doing this multi-site stuff, they're everywhere. You can't escape them. If we have one in my town, yeah, good luck getting away from this. And that's where they have been growing from, this particular church I'm talking about. They came into town and actually went to people in churches, including mine, and asked them to leave that church and become part of theirs and do this new thing because it was going to be great and it was going to be wonderful and it was going to be like the best thing ever. And some did. So, you're always going to have that dynamic going on. But eventually, it's going to come down to how many people you're bringing to Christ, isn't it? Because eventually you're going to run out of dissatisfied Christians. So I don't know how all this shakes out. My prediction for the future is I don't know. I do know this. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. It's going to get a lot harder before it gets easier. And anyone who thinks that this trend can be turned around in short order is dreaming and needs to wake up, smell the coffee, and deal with reality, because that's what we're looking at today. And with that, I am going to close up shop for another week. Hope you have a happy Thanksgiving. Those of you in the U.S., have a great time with whatever you do, whatever you eat, whoever you eat it with, whatever. God bless you. Give thanks to God for all that is good, for his son Jesus and his gospel. And don't forget, we'll be back next week. So till then, God bless you. And every time is a good time to disciple up.
Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast, is written, produced, directed, in as much as there's any direction of listening at all, edited every once in a while, and paid for by Louie. It's his personal ministry, and is not connected to Christ Church on the River. CCR does not sponsor, pay for, or necessarily approve the content found therein. The theme music for Disciple Up is Hot Wheels by Varensky. Yes, Louie actually paid for the rights to this very cool piece of music, so don't worry, and please call off the lawyers, as he's busy enough without having to deal with all that. All opinions expressed during Disciple Up are Louie's, and Louie's alone. They do not necessarily represent those of our sponsor, the Lord Jesus Christ. However, where the opinions, thoughts, impressions, and feelings shared are in line with God's Word, and faithfully represent what our Lord says in his holy word, the Bible, then they are representative of our Lord Jesus Christ. If you're wondering how the heck you're supposed to know this, remember, God tells you to test all things. Hold on to the truth. It's up to you to do the due diligence that God commands, so do it. Don't whine about it, and don't complain about how hard it is. Don't blame me for it. Disciple Up, and do what you know you're supposed to do. If you'd like to know more about Louie or Disciple Up, please go to discipleup.org and check out everything you find there. Or not, it's completely up to you. Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast will, God willing, publish an episode every week covering different areas of concern to disciples of Jesus. If that's important to you, then please subscribe on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, or another one of the many podcast aggregators available to you. If it's not, then don't. If you'd like to get in touch, please email Louie at louie@discipleup.org. God bless you.